Team building is one of the hardest yet most rewarding things you can do in any Pokemon game. So today, I'm going to walk you guys through the steps I take when it comes to team building. So the first step I take when it comes to team building is understanding what I'm building into, right? You have to know what is good in the metagame to be able to build a strong team. So what I have done here is I have grabbed basically what I consider to be the 10 best Pokemon, or at least 10 of the best Pokemon right now in Pokemon Legends Z8 ranked battles. So as you can see, I've kind of tiered them in a way here, right? So the top line here is what I think are the absolute best Pokemon in the game in no particular order. The second tier here is the tier just below them, and then the third tier is the tier just below that. So again, in my opinion, these are 10 of the best Pokemon. They might not be the exact 10 best, but in my opinion, this is kind of how I view it, right? So as you can see here, I've kind of just built this list, right? And then what I'll do from here is I'll kind of start analyzing things, right? So for example, you look at a Pokemon like Garchomp, right? It's 4x weak to Ice, right? You look at a Pokemon like Dragonite, it's also 4x weak to Ice. You look at a Pokemon like Gyarados here, who is 4x weak to Thunderbolt and to freeze dry in particular. And so essentially what I've done for today, right, is I've gone through this, you know, in my own time. I've looked at this and I basically kind of found a Pokemon that I want to build around. So after looking at this list here and having it next to me while I was kind of dabbling around in Pokemon Showdown, I ended up coming to the decision that I wanted to build around Glaceon, right? And the reason for wanting to build around Glaceon is pretty simple. Again, when you look at this here, I think the two best Pokemon in the game right now are Garchomp and Gyarados. In my honest opinion, they are the two best Pokemon right now. And the one type that beats both of them is either Bolt Beam coverage or ice coverage plus freeze dry. Freeze dry is 4 times super effective into both of these Pokemon. And because of that, I have decided today I want to build around Glaceon. So now that I've made the decision that my game plan is to build around Glaceon, what I tend to do here, whether this be for Legends ZA or for VGC, is jump into Pokemon Showdown. Pokemon Showdown is just one of the best resources in the game. It basically just allows you, to punch in your Pokemon, play around with it, have a look at potential movesets and all that kind of stuff, right? And it really just helps you kind of, I guess, make a decision on how you want to play the game, right? So again, we have Pokemon Showdown open here. We also have a couple of websites as well that I will link down below. First up here is the Maryland Team Builder. I really like the Team Builder here because it just gives you a good sense of what your Pokemon's type chart is like. So for example, we have Glaceon here. You see it only has 1 resistance in Ice, but it has 4 weaknesses, right? Which is Fire, Fighting, Rock, and Steel, right? So the game plan, for this is to kind of even this out, right? We don't really want to stack weaknesses, especially when we are playing with 3 Pokemon. Of course, it's entirely fine to do it, right? Sometimes you'll have something like 2 ground weaknesses and a Gyarados. Stuff like that is completely fine. But for today, because we are building around Glaceon, I do want to make this as balanced as possible. And the other thing as well I tend to do is I'll have something open like Pokemon Database here, right? Because again, this is the Pokédex. Typically, Pokemon Showdown is also a fantastic way to do this, but for Legends EA, for example, it's not as easy. I could come into here and type in the water types, and typically, if I'm playing like a VGC style format, it will only show the water type Pokemon that are legal in the format. Unfortunately, for Legends EA, we don't actually have that here in the builder, so I am going to be relying on something like Pokemon DB here, just to give us those answers, right? So one of the big things for me straight off the bat, right, is I see a steel weakness and a fire weakness. To me, this just screams water types, and bulky water types right now are also very, very good in this game, right? Particularly because, like, one, they have a good matchup into Gyarados, and then on top of that, two, they can carry Ice Beam as a secondary way to hit things like Garchomp and Dragonite, right? So again, I'll save you guys the basically the idea of me scrolling through this, and it did actually take me a long time to settle on this water type, but the water type I ended up opting to go for here was actually Slowbro. So the reason for Slowbro, one, is it's a mega option, right? This Pokemon can mega. It has very, very good bulk, right? We have a look, 95, 110 on the physical side, it's very good. And again, when you have a look at those Pokemon at the top of the meta, right, you're talking about things like Garchomp, Excadrill, and Gyarados, right? All of which are physical attackers, which Slowbro was very good into, and especially when it has its mega form, right? Mega Slowbro has 180 base defense. This Pokemon is incredibly bulky, right? And the other beautiful thing is with Slowbro as well is it does have a few different sets it can run, but we will talk about them shortly. So I'll quickly just come back here and I will punch in Slowbro, right? Because again, this is kind of, the mindset I went through, right, when it came to picking these Pokemon right now. The other big thing, so when it came to here, was I noticed one big issue I had was steel types in particular, right? I needed to be able to hit a steel type, but the issue was really your best options are like ground types and fire types, and I really felt this team needed a fire type, right? I just felt the last slot really had to be a Firemon. And initially I was looking at Chandelure, right? And again, I'll kind of just like go through this with you guys just so you can kind of, I guess, I try to just give you the thought process I went through, right? So I was looking at Shandy, but the big thing I hated with Shandy is this. You start seeing I'm stacking a lot of weaknesses, right? I've got Rock, two weaknesses without a resist, Ghost, 2 weaknesses without a resist, Dark, 2 weaknesses without a resist. And as strong as it was and as good as a fire type it is, it just didn't feel great. And then I was scrolling, right? I was scrolling. I'm like, Simi Seed, yeah, that's, it's not a good Pokemon. Camerupt, it's a ground type, right? 4x weak to water. It's not amazing. I'm looking through the list. Like maybe Zard, like a Zard off the ground could potentially be okay. But what I ended up settling on here was actually none other than one of the starter Pokemon of this game, Emboar. And for me, this was really cool because, like, one, I've wanted to play Emboar for a little bit. And two, I actually just think it makes a lot of sense on this team, right? So if you have a look at this, we are not stacking any weaknesses and we actually have a lot of resistances, right? And again, you look at it, right? We have 2 steel resist. Metagross is rising up in usage right now, which is very, very good. Glaceon is another Pokemon that is rising up in usage, similar to, the reason why I'm running it today, because it just has a very good matchup into the metagame. So having 3 Pokemon that just kind of ignore Glaceon is also really, really fun. And realistically, I think this team, it actually just has a really good type chart, right? I think it's really cool. We have 2 strong Megas. We have a Pokemon in Glaceon that is also pretty good. And that's kind of, I guess, how I just came to this core of 3, and I kind of wanted to just build around that. So now that we have our Pokemon, we have to kind of decide the sets we want to run. Now, for Glaceon, it was pretty simple. This Pokemon doesn't have Mega, so there's kind of 2 different options I personally think are good right now, and that's either Nevermelt Ice or Assault Vest, right? I think they're the 2 best sets you can run on this Pokemon right now. I will say I ended up opting for the Nevermelt Ice set. I think Nevermelt Ice, just in theory, is really good, right? Especially when you have a set like this where you've got Ice Beam, you got Freeze Dry, and you've got Blizzard, right? Because the other thing you can do here is you can go like Assault Vest and go Icy Wind, but I'm also just a huge fan of setup in this game. I think having moves like Calm Mind, Sword Stance, Bulk Up, all that kind of stuff is just busted. So I ended up looking at the team and I said, you know what? This is the set I want to run. So now for the Slowbro set. So the thing I really enjoy about Slowbro is this mod actually, in theory, can do a lot of things. Now, one thing I will mention when it came to this team in general, right, is I was looking at screens. I do think screens right now is one of the best, I guess, ways to play the game. If you've played against any bulky screens offenses, you kind of know what I'm talking about, right? Screens offense is just incredibly tough to deal with in this game, especially if they have a really good type matchup into you, right? And then looking at the team here, Glaceon's bulk are surprisingly not bad. 110-95 is very solid. The 65 HP does leave a little bit to be desired. Slowbro, on the other hand, very good HP, very good defense. Special defense, kind of low. And then Emboar here as well has really low defense and special defense. But the beauty of Emboar here is that actually in its mega form, it has a lot of special defense, right? So the only thing Emboar is kind of lacking here is physical defense, right? So I was really thinking, you know what? Slowbro with Reflect in particular could be really good. The issue is it doesn't get Reflect, it only gets Light Screen. So that kind of threw a kink in the armor, I guess, right? I was like, damn, okay, I'm not too sure, exactly how I want to play this. I originally thought, hey, I'll play screens. And then I kind of started having to shift the mindset, right? I was like, well, I don't think it's going to be able to play screens. And that's where I kind of just settled on the idea of Calm Mind and Psyshock. So Psyshock, I just love this move because it basically just, it hones in on the enemy. It's long range. It's very, very good. And also this Pokemon just loves Calm Mind, right? If you have a look at it, 100 special attack is great. The 80 special defense is also kind of average. But if we have a look at Mega Slowbro, this is where it actually kind of starts to get crazy, right? Because this thing has a ridiculous defense stat. It has a very respectable 130 special attack, and the special defense is the only thing kind of letting it down, right? So the ability to just really buff up that special defense, I thought was really, really important. And then the other thing here as well is we kind of had to pick the coverage moves, right? Or the other moves on the set. So typically, I do think that, you want to run a water move. It's honestly up to you. I ended up opting for Surf. I just like Surf. It's good AoE. I also am a huge fan of Hydro Pump in this game. If you can play the backline with Hydro Pump, I think it's very, very good. But for this team in particular, I wanted Surf, right? And then the final move really just comes down to personal preference. I decided to opt for Ice Beam. And the reason for Ice Beam is just because Garchomp is everywhere, right? Yeah, you can run some other moves. I think something like Flamethrower could be kind of cool. Mudshot as well for ground coverage is kind of nice. If this one had T-Bolt, I would probably go for Thunderbolt instead. But it doesn't, and that's kind of why I ended up just opting to go for the Ice Beam, right? It is just really, really solid coverage on the Pokemon. And then finally, Emboar. Now, Emboar's an interesting one, right? Because again, it has 123 attack, very, very good. Its defense is a subpar. When it megas, it fixes up that Spadef, making it very, very good, but its, physical defense is still pretty bad. But it does have access to Bulk Up, which kind of patches that one weakness in the set. Now, as for the moves, Flare Blitz and Close Combat are its 2 primary stabs, so for me, this was an absolute must. Now, The other thing with this team was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the last spot on Emboar, right? So when it comes to Emboar, if you have a look at its moveset here, it does have some pretty good coverage, right? It gets Head Smash, which is very, very nice, right? It also gets access to things like Thunder Punch, it gets Wild Charge, of course it gets Earthquake, Stone Edge, Poison Jab. This Pokemon has a lot it can do, but the one thing, basically, that I was scared of more than anything was Gyarados. When I looked at my team, yes, I have Freeze Dry on Glaceon. The issue with Freeze Dry is you have to essentially be on top of them, right? You have to get into melee range of them for that Freeze Dry to pop off. And while typically that is fine for a Pokemon like Emboar, you really don't want your, Glaceon getting into the middle of a fight unless it has to. And it can also be really annoying for chasing things down as well. So that's why I ended up just opting for an electric move on my Emboar. Now, again, we haven't actually, spoken about which one is better, because there are two options, right? There's Thunder Punch and there's Wild Charge. Wild Charge is better if you want, like, just pure damage. Thunder Punch, though, is just cool because, like, no recoil. It still does a lot of damage. And we'll kind of go into why I ended up deciding to pick Thunder Punch in a second when we go through the EV spreads. All right, so I am over here on the damage calculator, at least my damage calculator of choice. Again, link will be down below in the description, right? So basically, let's start off with Glaceon. This is the start of the show, right? So when we look at Glaceon's stats, its stats are actually really solid, especially for how ZA works, right? Typically, obviously, this is a Pokemon that doesn't care about its attack stat. So normally what lets this thing down is its HP and its speed. Now, and again, in this game mode, speed really isn't an issue, and HP kind of is the only one, right? So typically, when I look at a stat spread like this, I see 65, 110, 95. I instantly just want to go max HP. There is almost no reason to not play max HP on this Pokemon. And the other thing we really want to do with Glaceon in particular is also try to get as much special attack as possible. But I am also a huge fan in making sure that you can tank hits on Pokemon. Right now, again, I've got the stuff up on the side here, just looking at some of those Pokemon I was talking about, right? So, for example, one thing I want to make sure my Glaceon can do here is live a Earthquake, right? So you can see here, this is a single target Earthquake coming off of a Garchomp, right? So again, very, very important now. And this is actually at 170, so we are actually calculating this in particular for Mega Garchomp right now. So let's just go to +1, let's just say, all right, they get Upper Swords then, we still live. We only live this 56% of the time. So I want to make sure we live that every single time, right? So I'm just going to put some stat points into it and bang, we hit 100. Now, this is actually really, really interesting, right? Because there is another Pokemon that this also helps with, right? So I'm just going to go Excadrill here. I'm just using the base sets. So we go here and we will see that we actually live the Iron Head always as well with this. Right, and then I think we can, you can bump it up. I think Mega Drill is like 165, and you have a look at that, right? There's a 25% chance to live this. So already that 100 stat that allows us to make sure we live the Garchomp is very, very good. It gives us a very solid roll into something like Excadrill. I already know we're not going to ever live a Heavy Slam off Metagross, right? You can take a look at it, but again, like Heavy Slam, it's just going to bop you. You would have to invest way too much into it to even have a chance, right? Even if I go 252 here, it's still barely a chance. If I go something like a Bold Nature, it's still like a 44% chance if we go max bold, which would really lower our, our damage output, right? So for me, I am more than content to say, hey, if I see a Metagross, just don't let it heavy slam me. Make sure we can live that +1 Earthquake coming off a Garchomp. We still have a really solid chance to live base form Excadrill's Iron Head. And again, I'm just like looking through the list, right? You can go for things like, Gyarados. Can you live like a Gyarados Waterfall, for example, right? And again, I already know the answer is yes, right? If you can live the, the attack coming off that Mega Garchomp, you're not too stressed here, right? If they run Iron Head, do you live it? Like, the answer is yes. What if he's like a Mega, right? It's like, yep, you live very, very comfortably a Iron Head from a Mega, Gyarados. So for me, this defensive stat here, I am completely fine with this now at this stage. This 252, 100 defense to me feels really, really good, right? It's very, very solid. Now, in terms of special attack, obviously this Pokemon's special defense stat is quite a bit lower. But when it came to all the big special attackers, basically anything that can hit this thing for super effective damage, so things like, for example, Chandelure, right? They're just going to KO you anyway, right? Like, you even look at this, right? A Heat Wave off a non-invested Chandelure is just going to KO you, right? If this thing is like 252, which is pretty typical, you are just going to need way too much investment to even have a chance, right? Even if I go 252, it is still a 50% chance, right? But what you can do is you can click a Calm Mind and bang, you always live it from, this Pokemon. Now, if they do go Mega, because, obviously this thing's Mega is pretty broken, at +1, it's a 44% chance. And at that stage, you've just got to kind of accept that, right? You've got Slowbro, which is really good into it. You've got Emboar, which can also tank it as well. So at that stage, I was just pretty happy with this spread, right? I'm like, I've got the physical bulk I need for the things I want my, Glaceon to be fighting. At this stage now, it's all about going into offense. Typically, I would always recommend going for a set like this where you go 4 into special defense and 4 into speed. It's just efficiency on your EVs. The only issue I had was, if you have a look at this, if I pump here, we hit 169, right? The issue with hitting 169 is when we go modest, right? And I'll kind of show you guys how this works here. If we go modest, right, we have 187, but if we put one more set of EVs, we go up to 187, right? So, sorry, we go from 185 to 187. So basically, you hit that bump number. Hitting that 170 is really important there. And that's why, for me, I was just happy to go with this set here. 252, 100, 165. I feel like it's just a very solid set. It gives you the physical bulk you need to live things like Garchomp. It gives you good rolls into, of course, the Excadrill. It gives you good stuff into, obviously, Gyarados. Like a lot of the other offensive mons, right? You know, talking about things like Dragonite, for example, you're going to live a Fire Punch of it. It's just really, really solid. And so for me, this was a great starting point. And having Calm Mind as well kind of just like it makes this Pokemon's damage output go kind of crazy, especially with Never Melt Ice, right? It just allows you to do really, really big ice damage in a metagame where a lot of Pokemon are quite weak to ice type attacks. So next up here is Slowbro. Now, again, Slowbro is a very similar Pokemon to what we were talking about with Glaceon, right? Its special defense stat is, you know, pretty lackluster compared to the other two stats, right? And again, on a Pokemon like this, you kind of just want to go 252 into HP. You kind of want to invest as much into your special defense stat as possible because your physical defense stat is already so high. So for me, the most important thing here was just figuring out what you need to live. And again, if you go back and look at those Pokemon I was talking about at the start, the only one that really threatens you is Ampharos, right? So we go into Ampharos here and we click its Thunderbolt. We're going to see that this thing does quite a bit of damage to us, right? Especially if they are 252 modest, right? So if I go 252 modest here, we are going to see that there is a 56% chance it KOs us, right? So for me, it's pretty simple. Just put a little bit into your special defense there. You hit that 76 number, which is pretty good. To me, that is like almost more than enough, right? So at this stage, you know, again, there's nothing else this Pokemon really needs to live. With its natural bulk, you're already living things like Thunder Punches off D-Knights, right? You're living things like Earthquakes coming out of the Garchomp at, you know, the Mega Garchomp at +1. You know, you're living a lot of things with this guy's insane levels of bulk. So really just getting that special defense up a little higher is really, really important, especially too, because you are going to click Calm Mind, right? So when this thing Calm Minds, that, you know, 110 stat all of a sudden becomes 165, which is very, very powerful, right? And then typically there, I would just look to pump into the special attacks that you're going to see here. We're just going to roll up just a little bit. We have those leftover EVs as well. So, you know, I'm just going to put one into each of those. And then you see here, we end up at 142, right? So for me, we're so close to the bump that I would prefer just drop it down, hit that bump, go a modest nature, and then just put those remaining points into my special defense, right? Because again, when you're clicking Calm Mind, it ends up being 3 more points total at the end, which again, I think is just really, really solid. So the final piece of the team here, of course, is our Emboar. Now, one of the big things with Emboar, of course, is that it does have a bit of a weakness into the top Pokemon in the metagame, right? Of course, when you look at things like Gyarados, you look at things like Garchomp, Excadrill, all that kind of stuff, they kind of do mess you up, right? Now, again, I've got a Garchomp here with Earthquake, and you can see this is very, very difficult for us to live. It's not pretty at all, right? So defensive calcs on this thing may just have to go out the window because of that. Now, for me in particular, again, what I've gone through all the calcs. This was the one I spent the most time looking at by far. I'll just spoil it here just so we know how many points we have to work around with. I did end up opting for 236 Adamant, right? This just allows you to hit a lot of things for a lot of damage, right? You know, for example, if you have a look at something like Gyarados here, if they're, you know, just like a standard set like this, right? You will see that if we slap a Thunder Punch onto this bad boy, we should never KO this thing, right? Really, really sad that we're never going to KO a max HP Gyarados, right? And sorry, that's with Intimidate on. My bad. We're always going to KO it. I was going to say, I'm like, wait, why did I go Thunder Punch over Wild Charge? Don't worry, ignore me. We're always going to KO it. We had Intimidate turned on here, right? So this is why we actually went for Thunder Punch, right? Because we know we're guaranteed to always kill it with this. That's why I opted Thunder Punch over Wild Charge, right? I looked at calcs with like Greninja. Greninja lives a Wild Charge anyway at max HP. So I'm like, well, what's the point? Let's just go with the Thunder Punch just because we know the Thunder Punch carries Gyarados, and that's what it's here for. Now, when it came to the bulk again, this was a really difficult one for me to look at. So you have a look at this, you know, we're pretty comfortable with Waterfall, right? If we just go like 4-4 like this, we're going to live a Waterfall. That's completely fine, right? Obviously that's not invested. So we go Adamant here, 252, we're not going to live it, right? So step one for me is kind of trying to live something like this. Now, again, if you go like 252, what you'll see here is we never live it. And we don't really have the EVs for this set anyway, right? So you kind of need to tweak it around a bit. And the set I ended up opting for here was actually 84 and 180. Now, the reason for this is like, one, you know, you can see we guaranteed live the Waterfall. When you go to like a Pokemon like Garchomp, right? you're gonna have a look at this. We are always just KO'd to the earthquake, right? But what we aren't KO'd to, I believe, all the time is dig. We actually have a chance at living this. And as you can see here, it's a very, very good chance, right? A adamant 252 Garchomp with dig is not always going to KO us. As a matter of fact, most of the time we are going to survive, which I do think is very important, because if we're living it from this thing, we're also, doing a pretty good job living it from Excadrill as well, right? Their attack stats are very, very similar. But of course, if you can live one, pretty, not comfortably, but like most of the time, same thing here, right? Like less than a 20% chance to KO you, and then obviously being able to fire off like a CC or a Blitz into it, very, very important, right? So that was kind of where I ended up with this defensive calc. But the big thing as well is we do have access to bulk up, right? And because of that, if we go to like +1, for example, right? And we'll just throw Earthquake back into this here. And then we'll just play around with this here as well. So if it's a single target Earthquake, you see we actually always live it. So that's really big. And that's why, again, why I love bulk up so much on this Pokemon. If this thing does go to say like Mega, we still live it. Even into a Mega Garchomp, for example, we have a pretty decent chance. Again, like it's not perfect, right? Because we have so much attack and you could potentially drop it down. It's not great. But if you Mega and you get that extra 10 points, then you always live it. So this was kind of how I ended up on this spread. I spent a lot of time looking at calcs. There were a lot of different things. I was looking at like, can I live things like Hydro Pump off Greninja? Water Shurikens. What about like a Starmie, a Slowbro? Can I live their stuff? And it's like, look, when you Mega, you go from 65 SPDF to 110 SPDF, right? Makes you way, way bulkier on that side of things. So I really just wanted to show up the physical defense. And that's kind of how I ended up at this set, right? That 84, 236, 180, right? This Pokemon's already has such a high HP pool that it's like, it's still really, really good if you to like invest into the, invest into the defensive stat, right? So that's kind of how I ended up here. So anyway, guys, that is my kind of, I guess, step-by-step walkthrough that I like to go through here when it comes to team building. Of course, now I did obviously cut out a lot of the stuff, especially when it came to the damage calcs, right? I probably spent a good 30+ minutes just looking at a bunch of different calcs before I ended up on this set I want to run, right? And again, I think it's very, very important as well when you are building teams, knowing what your Pokemon can live is very, very crucial, how much damage your Pokemon can do, right? Because again, what's the point in playing a Pokemon if you're just like, oh, like my typing's here, it's fine, it's okay. Like, for example, Gardevoir, right? Gardevoir into Garchomps. A lot of people will just be like, oh, it's fine, I have the type matchup, and then you just get one shot by an Earthquake, and you're like, what the hell just happened? So yeah, I think it's very, very important to know what you can and can't live on offense. And of course, these days we are playing a bit, bit different spreads, right? That first week or so when this game came out, I was playing max HP, max special attack, but now you can kind of see we're adapting, right? We're dropping a bit of the offense and we're going into a bit more of the defensive stuff. And I think that's very, very important, especially if you want to succeed at these games at a high level. But anyway, guys, that is going to be it for this one. If you guys are interested in watching me play with the team, make sure you check it out after this video. It should hopefully go up a couple hours after, depending on when I actually get around to recording it. But anyway, guys, that's going to be it for this one. Let me know what you think of the team down below, and let me know what you guys want me to build with next. I do want to continue to build. I do have a regional coming up this weekend for VGC, so I'm not too sure if I will have much of a chance over the weekend to build it, but definitely early next week. I would love to, get back into Builder and build some stuff. But anyway, guys, that's going to be it for this one. I will catch you all on the next one. Peace.